Thank you so much. I'm truly honored to be here, and I really enjoy doing work with Jahangir. We've worked together for the last couple of years on a number of different interfaith-oriented projects. He had asked me here tonight to say a few words from my own perspective. As I had mentioned, I do a lot of interfaith work, and I am, you can probably tell by my last name, I'm at least ethnically Jewish. I'm not particularly observant, but I am, from a Jewish background. Sometimes people ask me why I do interfaith work. Particularly, I tend to focus a lot on the relationship with the Islamic community. And people tend to forget that Jews and Muslims have had a very close relationship for many, many years. And we tend to look at the relationship between Jews and Muslims under a microscope of only the last few decades in many ways. And I point out to people that and this is not only, well, I also want to focus specifically on the Iranian community, the Persian community. If not for Persians, Judaism would not exist. This is a very sort of a strange statement to make. In 587 BC, the Empire of Babylon destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, took over Israel, and deported all of the leadership of Israel to the city of Babylon. About 45 years later, the Achaemenid Persian Empire liberated Israel from its bondage to the Empire of Babylon. And under King Cyrus the Great, in 540 BC, Israel was liberated. The project to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem began. And over the next 200 years, Israel enjoyed a thriving relationship with the Persian Empire. Judaism changed, went more in a direction of monotheism. It changed dramatically from what it had been beforehand. So if not for the benevolence and the generosity and the care of the Persian Empire at that time, Israel, Judaism, would have become a footnote in the annals of history. It would have dissolved under the Babylonian Empire. And so I point this out, that we as Jews owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to our Persian brothers and sisters and to the shared history. And of course, beyond that, this is of course before the advent of Islam. This is about 1,000 years before Islam. This was during the time of Zoroastrianism. But also the relationship between Jews and Muslims is a very long and collaborative one. And what we've seen over the last, maybe in the last century with, some of the not so nice moments, this is a small blip on the screen of a long relationship of a family. And sometimes family fights, but when all is said and done, we're still family. I want to mention just one last thing, if you don't mind. I grew up towards the end of the Cold War in the 1970s and 1980s, and as Americans, we were sold a bill of goods that the Soviets, that they hate our way of being, they hate us, that we are natural enemies, the Russians and Americans. And towards the end of the 1980s, with the advent of glasnost and the warming of the relationship between the United States and Russia, particularly under Mikhail Gorbachev, Americans began to realize that the Russians are people just like us, and that their leadership do not necessarily represent who they are. And so in a lot of ways, I see the same thing between the country of Iran and the United States, that our leadership does not represent us all the time. Sometimes we're embarrassed about our leadership. But the kindness and the generosity that was shown by the Iranian people in this movie, this brilliant film that I've seen a number of times now in my work with Jahangir, the generosity and kindness that was shown by the Iranian people to these two young folks, one of whom did not survive, the other who did, this is part of the culture, part of the national character of Iranian people, and I am grateful to know so many Iranians and to work with them in the larger interfaith movement. So I want to thank you, Jahangir, once again for including me in this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Frank, for coming. Thank you, my friend. Thank you. Here you go. You could tell them how we met and tell us your...
Well, first of all, I love Jahangir. I love his film. I've seen it many times, like you. I'm emotional right now because it's about loving our fellow human beings everywhere. We're all people. He says it in the film, and it's such an important message. I was on, I don't know how many of you listen to KPFK or know about Blaise Pompey. I'm on his radio show. He's a great anti-war activist here in Southern California. I think it was 2007, and John Gere heard me, and he liked what I was saying, and he called him up, and he got my phone number and called me. He wanted me to come see his film. He said it was about this earthquake in Iran. And I said, well, that's good, but I'm an anti-war activist. I don't know about why would I want to come see this film. And he convinced me to come see it, and I went to his editor's house. It was a rainy day in the valley. I drove out there. It wasn't quite finished. It was almost finished. And I watched the movie with John Gere and his editor. And when it was over, man, I burst out crying like a baby. I'm emotional today about it because this man makes films that are, I don't think they're just showing how good the Persian people are and the Iranian people are, but people in the world are good. We're good. It's our leaders who aren't good, that run, the people with all the money that want war and want to kill people. And so I support everything John Gere does, and I'm happy to be here tonight.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
When I saw the film BAM 6.6, I knew a little bit about the history. I knew the story and what had happened. But I found it, first of all, a very, very moving story in human terms, and how people deal with tragedy, how people deal with loss. At the time, I was teaching political science and history at the Naval Academy. What I appreciated was, again, how the film brought the issues of Iran and the United States, which is where we've had a very troubled relationship now for more than 30 years. And took those issues and brought them down to the most human dimension, so that people who otherwise knew nothing about Iran and its history, its sometimes very tragic history and long history, could see that these were people of great feeling, of great compassion, and of great humanity.
1953 to 55, so I knew Iran way back then. And then I knew Iran in a different capacity when I was a hostage in Tehran in 1979, 81, which began well but ended with my colleagues and I becoming hostages and being used by the government of Iran at that time. I still am a friend of Iran, an admirer of Iran, an enormous respect for the Iranian people, whose qualities came through very well, I thought, in this film, of hospitality particularly, of friendship, of warm regard for their fellow man and woman, wherever they are, facing that kind of tragedy. I have not been back to Tehran since the end of the hostage crisis, but I deeply regret that 28 years later we do not talk with Iran. That is ridiculous. I'm sure that everyone here tonight to watch this film is basically a friend of Iran, laments the fact that there is no dialogue between Iran and the United States, and feels and felt deeply tonight how wrong it is that we are not in direct dialogue with the people evident in that film. It's a very moving film. I'm glad I came. It is poignant. It is very effective in getting a message across that we are all one people, wherever we live, whatever we do, particularly in the face of tragedy, when everyone like this, when everyone has to rally around. And thank God that point comes through in that film, that the people of that tormented city in the aftermath of that tragedy.
It was very moving. The message of people to people, helping people, and that we're all the same, and that we transcend color, race, is so powerful in this film. It's very moving, because I, like so many, have, Iran, where, what is it, where is it, what are the people like? It is, you can read about something, but if you actually go there and experience it, where you are living with the people or you break bread with the people, that's the only way we're ever going to bring peace, is when we know each other on a very personal level.
My name is Mimi Kennedy. I'm an actress and I'm also an activist with Progressive Democrats of America. I helped found that organization primarily because world peace was my focus, and I wanted to devote the rest of my life to humanity living interdependently at peace. I work on honest elections and I work on ending war. And when I saw BAM 6.6, John gave it to me here at the Peace Center when we were watching another film about a peace activist, Brian J. Wilson. I went home, I watched it, and I was in tears because it showed me a side of Iranian culture that I did not understand its profundity. The generosity, the hosting of the stranger, the feeding and the caring for the stranger is so deeply embedded in Iranian culture that the idea that my country would make an enemy of Iran and say, these people must be bombed, we must treat the stranger with murder in our hearts, punish them and make them suffer and kill them, it's so profoundly wrong. It's 180 degrees different from what we should be doing. Violence is always terrible, but the idea that Iran is our enemy is completely wrong. And this film, BAM 6.6, refers to an earthquake, 6.6. Interestingly, that's the same power that was an earthquake in our house in California, 6.6. We survived, thank God. But this was in a village where an American couple was, a young American couple, and the whole thing collapsed around them. Their treatment by the Iranian people was so beautiful. They were put first in all the care because they were the guests. I think every American has to see this. I want every congressperson to see this, every leader. And this will end any story that the Iranian people deserve anything at the hands of Americans but a hand stretched out in friendship so that we may be friends with these people, know them, and create world peace together. Thank you for the film, John.
I loved the movie. I cried and cried and cried, and I think everybody should watch it. It gets to the core of the issue about who are the Iranian people, and they are known for their compassion, their hospitality, their openness to foreigners. And most people in this country have no idea. So you see that movie and you recognize that these people are so compassionate, so genuine, so loving, and it changes your whole image of Iran. I went to Iran and I fell in love with the people. The people are extraordinary, and I travel all over the world. It's kind of like Anthony Bourdain said, the nicest people in the world you find in Iran. And I felt that way too. I couldn't go to a restaurant without somebody coming up and saying, oh, are you a foreigner? Where are you from? And they would pay for my meal. You know, they always want to do something for you. And they love Americans. They love Jews. I'm Jewish, and I would say I'm Jewish. They, oh, we love Jews. So there's a really certain quality about Iranians that no matter how much money they have, they want to give. And we are the opposite in this country, where it's take, and accumulate. And the height of that is Donald Trump, which is just, me. And Iranians are very much us, and be kind. Well, I'm an activist, and I used to work for the United Nations, so I traveled a lot around the world, and I saw so many things I didn't like that I said, I better become an activist to try to change these things. And I write just so I can help to educate people and get them involved. Well, thank you for the films that you do that really are so critical about changing the narrative of Iranians as terrorists to Iranians as warm, wonderful, compassionate people.